Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Penn Vicarage on this lovely, crisp, and sunny Tuesday morning. Great to see you. Thank you for joining us today. Now, just to remind you, we are working our way through the Gospel of Mark. To remind you what's happened, Jesus is in Jerusalem. He's been teaching in the temple. He's answered a load of questions. He's asked some questions, and now he leaves the temple basically for the last time. And this is how it happens. Mark's Gospel, chapter 13. I'm going to read verses 1 to 13. As Jesus came out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what large stones and what large buildings." Then Jesus asked him, "Do you see these buildings? Not one stone will be left here one upon another. They will all be thrown down." While he was sitting on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter, James, John and Andrew asked him privately, "Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign that these things are about to be accomplished?" Then Jesus began to say to them, "Beware that no one leads you astray. Many will come in my name and say, 'I am he,' and they will lead many astray. When you hear wars and rumours of wars, do not be alarmed. This must take place, but the end is still to come. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places, there will be famines, but this is the beginning of the birth pangs. As for yourself, beware. They will hand you over to councils, and you'll be beaten in synagogues, and you will stand before governors and kings because of me, as a testimony to them. And the good news must first be proclaimed to all nations. When they bring you to trial and hand you over, do not worry beforehand what you are to say, but whatever is given to you at that time, for it is not you who will speak, but the Holy Spirit. Brother will betray brother to death, and a father his child, and children will rise against parents and have them put to death, and you'll be hated by all because of my name. But the one who endures to the end will be saved." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Well, Mark chapter 13 is not an easy chapter, but I'll try and thread my way through it with you in the next 2 or 3 days. I've always thought in reading this that Jesus is talking here about the end of the world, or the second coming of Christ, or if you want to give it its fancy term, the parousia. I've always thought that's what Jesus was talking about. But on careful reflection this morning, I don't think he is. Well, not yet anyway. And I think certainly in these verses, Jesus is talking about something very different. Now, before you burn me at the stake as a heretic, I do believe in the return of Christ, but let me tell you what I think he's talking about here. I've always said, and I will say again and again and again, that the context of a reading is absolutely vital. And it essentially, more than ever true in this morning's reading today. Where does this take place? Firstly, it takes place, there's 2 scenes, but firstly it takes place as they're leaving the temple. And as they leave the temple, they leave this amazing building. The disciples kind of revel in what they see around them. And they say, what amazing buildings. And actually, well, they might. The temple in those days had been rebuilt by Herod, and it was amazing. Apparently, you could get 13 football fields in there. It was a mile circumference. Because it was on a slope towards the Kidron Valley, between the top bit and we actually went down 15 stories. We are talking here about one of the wonders of the ancient world. It truly, I cannot overstate just how magnificent the temple was in those days. No wonder the disciples, as they went by, went, "Wow, Lord, what amazing stones here." And it's in the temple there. And Jesus says to them, not one stone will be left upon another. So the first bit, you have them as they leave the temple, talking about the temple. Then they go straight to across the Kidron Valley, up to the Mount of Olives. And if you've ever been there, what you've basically got is you've got the Mount of Olives on one side, the Kidron Valley in front of you, and the temple would have been in front of them. So basically, from where they were sitting on the Mount of Olives, this temple complex would have been right in front of them. In other words, because of where it started, the reading started, and because of where Jesus is with his disciples when he talks about it, I think he's actually talking about the temple. And as I said, the disciples have revelled in what amazing buildings, as well they might. Any of us would have been if we'd been there at the time. It truly was one of the wonders of the ancient world. And Jesus says, not one stone will be left upon another. And Jesus was absolutely right. Because, of course, in 70 AD, the Romans came in and smashed it. And when I say smashed it, they really smashed it. They smashed it so much that the temple was so badly damaged, you couldn't even see where it had been before. They absolutely razed the place to the ground. Like I say, it's actually disputed to this day as to the exact location of where the temple actually was. So Jesus' prophecy was absolutely right. They did raise the place to the ground. What, not one stone was left upon another. The Romans did come in and trash it. And what's more, his prophecies of what would happen before that also happened as well. It was in the days of Caligula and Nero, and there were rumours of wars, and there were wars, and there were earthquakes, as happened in Pompeii and various other places, and famines, and all those sorts of things, and all the things Jesus said were going to happen, all happened before 70 AD, when the temple was razed to the ground. And the Christians, as Jesus said they were persecuted. And the people that Mark was writing the gospel to in the early 60s, shortly before 70 AD, were experiencing exactly the persecution that Jesus was talking about here. So I think in this reading, Jesus is essentially talking about the destruction of the temple. The temple, which where they've been at the beginning, where the disciples have been reveling in these wonderful buildings, and from where they were sitting, the temple complex was right in front of them. And it's that, I think, that Jesus is talking about here. But what can we learn from this? Firstly, this, I think that human beings love reveling in their own achievements. We are very good at, as a race, we're very good at we're very proud, actually. And we're very good at reveling in what we've done. We're very good at reveling in, the great things that we achieve and the great monuments that we make and so on. In the words of one golfer, I'm in awe of myself, said one golfer. Human beings are very good at that. And I think what Jesus is doing here is partly reminding us all that actually God's in charge of events. That we can build wonderful things and we can think that we're terribly clever and we can revel in our own achievements as much as you like, but actually God is in charge of events. And God knows what's going on. And Big G is in charge. And Jesus is Lord. And God is Lord. And actually it is God who's in charge of events. And we can, if we want to, we can be proud of our own achievements. But actually, however great our achievements are, God is King and God reigns supreme. I think that's the first thing. This event reminds us of the power and the lordship of God. I think the second thing is that the temple was the place where you went to meet God. And of course, after Jesus died and rose again, Jesus has become the new temple. We meet God in Jesus. We don't actually need temples anymore because Jesus is the temple. In him, he is the ladder to heaven. He is the way in which we get to know God. In him, we have a relationship with God. We do not need to go to church anymore. We don't find fancy buildings to meet God anymore. We can meet God anywhere. Of course, before you get the wrong idea, church is important. It's important we gather together as Christians, and worshiping together is powerful. But we actually don't need fancy buildings anymore. Jesus is, we don't need them, they're good to have, but actually we meet God in Jesus. He is our new temple. And I think whilst the original temple was still there, people might have felt the temptation to go back there. But I think the fact that the temple was completely destroyed demonstrates that Jesus is the new temple. That in him is we know God. We meet God in Jesus. As I say, it's good to go to churches because and that's good. It's good that we meet together, and it's good to build buildings for the glory of God. But actually, we meet God in Jesus, and in him, he, in that sense, is the new temple. But thirdly, I'm thinking of the people that Mark wrote the gospel originally for. We're talking about people in the early 60s, shortly before the temple was destroyed, who were experiencing the most horrendous persecution under the likes of Nero and so on. And I think it will have been a big encouragement for them. That Jesus always said this was going to happen. The persecution is a sign of authentic Christianity. It doesn't say that things are going wrong. It actually means that we're doing something right. And Jesus always said it was going to be. And actually it demonstrates that the prophecy of Jesus was right. And when the temple was destroyed, it demonstrated that the prophecy of Jesus was correct, that he was true to his word. He really did know what he was talking about. And I think the fact that, God is in charge of events and Jesus said it was going to happen will have been a massive encouragement to those Christians in all their suffering, and encouraging them to keep firm, to keep faithful, to keep the faith and stay close to Christ. So I think the message for us is to remember, firstly, that God is in charge of events. That's really important. Secondly, to remember that actually it's in Jesus that we meet God. In a sense, he is the new temple. We meet Jesus in him. Sure, we can do it in buildings, and we can do it together, and that's all really important. But actually, essentially, we meet God together in Jesus. But thirdly, the encouragement this must have been to the poor Christians, or these Christians I should say, in the early 60s Mark was writing to, in all the suffering they were encountering in Rome, the encouragement to know that God is in charge of events. Jesus always said it was going to be, that their faith is right and authentic, and it would have been a great encouragement to them, and it's a great encouragement to us too.